Morning, colleagues. Thank you so much, Tanya, for the introduction. Just one point of correction, because I might risk losing my job. I'm the co-director or deputy director at PACE, not the director, at the Pan-African Collective for Evidence. Colleagues, it is truly an honor and privilege to be here. And thank you, organizing committee, for this wonderful opportunity. And Vivian, thank you. Colleagues, I think this is probably the first time that I say it's an honor and privilege to be standing in front of a big crowd like this, and I'm truly meaning it, right? So I'm just going to take a slight deviation from the protocol. So the first reason, as you've seen, I was sitting exactly where the Deputy Prime Minister was sitting, and I'm also standing where he was, so I think that's a big win. But on a more serious note, let me just take you back quickly to yesterday in the opening plenary, which was, for me, inspiring and captivating, right? Again, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Isabel and Najat, for beautifully setting the tone for the conference. But just to reflect on some of the elements that really came from Jeremy Farah's presentation yesterday, when he implored us to reflect back, to think about where we have come from individually or maybe as organization. And it's as if you are speaking to me directly. And I think 2017 almost becomes an important year because, presentation, Yitka, you mentioned, some groundbreaking work starting in 2017. And he also mentions 2017. It's an important year for me because that's the year that I started my journey in evidence synthesis, right? So, yeah, I'm relatively young. I'm not as old as I look. And I can tell you, if you look at my beard, this gray hair, it's because of so many systematic reviews and evidence that we have done. I say this with absolute certainty, but with zero evidence whatsoever to back it up. But yeah, that was the start of my journey. I was in Cape Town for the inaugural GES summit. And then fast forward 5 years later, I received the Farah Jamal Award for early career researchers from Campbell Collaboration. I want to try and connect these two things, right? And I'm going to extend a small invitation to you guys, right? So this reflection about where we've come from, what happened this year, early this year, some of you might know, maybe a few colleagues, I was involved in a car accident. I fractured 8 ribs, so some doctors might understand what really happened there, what that really means. But in reflection of the work over the years, one thing that has kept pushing me is always telling myself, what would Farah Jamal do, right, in my work? And I just want to kindly ask for a moment of silence just to observe and honor Farah Jamal's work before I continue with my presentation. Thank you so much. Let's continue. I basically have no conflict of interest to declare. My presentation, I'll basically start with a quick introduction of the Pan-African Collective for Evidence. It's an NGO that is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And our aim is to basically reduce poverty and inequality across the African continent. It's a team of about 20 evidence synthesis specialists. Sometimes, from time to time, the team becomes bigger as we draw on more resources. More importantly, PACE provides secretariat to the Africa Evidence Network. Some of you might actually know we had a big Africa Evidence Week in August, where we're showcasing EIDM initiatives across the continent. And thank you to those who managed to participate. Thank you, Carla, for involving Cochrane in those activities. And how do we basically engage in our work, right? So I've said our vision is to see a world free of poverty and inequality. And we work across several or a few areas: evidence capacities, communities, synthesis, etc. And more importantly, it's about building institutionalization of evidence to police systems, which is the core of the presentation that I'm going to make, right? And we work through a partnership model, and I'm going to highlight some of these aspects as I continue. What is it that we do? This is just the foundation, building blocks to my presentation around co-production. And I think you might want to keep that picture that you see in your head, that you see right in front of you there. That is the president with a certain lady that I'm going to refer to. She's actually in attendance at this conference here. She was just demonstrating one of the evidence maps that we produced. But essentially, how we do this, how we do our work, we compile responsive policy-aligned evidence bases. These are some of the examples that we do. Then we do this both at national and provincial level. We also do provide rapid response evidence synthesis, institutionalization. We support it. That is our work with that particular lady that I'm going to name in a few slides that are coming up. We also share capacity to providing training, as well as facilitating communities of practice for APIBM, largely through the Africa Evidence Network. But let's talk synthesis, right? And here I'm going also to refer to some of the sessions that we might actually want to attend that are connected, in our work. So firstly, on the left-hand panel here, trying to see how our work fits within other initiatives globally. So on the left-hand panel is basically the model that the Alliance for Living Evidence is thinking about their living evidence partnerships, and we see ourselves fitting right in that middle part. And also on the right-hand panel, you see the recently published or the updated Global Evidence Commission report, and we see our work fitting within the first principle here about formalizing and strengthening domestic evidence support systems. With that, I'm also inviting you tomorrow to the session where we'll speak more about this commission report. The title of the session is Making 2024 the Year We Make a Step Change Improvement in Using Evidence to Address Societal Challenges. Again, speaking about these synergies, left-hand panel, you see EVIPNet. We are involved with EVIPNet. More importantly, the Africa Evidence Network that I have highlighted and EVIPNet, we work to complement each other. The AEN is covering more of African continent. EVIPNet is global. And from time to time, we join forces when there's strategic opportunities that have arisen. And again, to refer you to a special important session that we'll be hosting again tomorrow, really it's about an evidence map that we co-produced together around the global research agenda or interventions aimed at improving evidence use by decision makers. And also, on the right-hand panel, on the right-hand side, again, special invitation. Please do join us on Friday on the launch of the Global Coalition for Evidence. We're also involved in those initiatives as well. But yeah, let's move on to the key focus of this presentation, embedded co-production, that is pioneered and led by the Center of Government. Now, that name and that picture that I promised I'm going to share with you. So this, what you see is a snapshot. This is what my director likes to call it, the Bible. It's our guiding document when it comes to co-production. It's a report that is written by Aisha Dayal. She's sitting right there on the left-hand side, and team works in the presidency. And this report actually just summarizes the approach to co-production in South Africa and shows how this model works in practice, right? And for you to understand a bit more, if you have specific questions, please do get a chance to engage with her at this conference. But it highlights these 6 core principles, 6 core components of co-production. And we have seen earlier on in the slide, the work that we've done, some examples, but essentially more than 15 products that we've co-produced with government, both at national and at provincial level. Now let's talk about what is different when we talk about this policy-led co-production approach. What we think is different, it's about policy leadership, right? And we are co-producing for the purpose of ensuring that evidence is used by decision makers and not really to make research more relevant, right? And that presents two advantages. The first one is that the co-production is commissioned and actually led by civil servants, right? And that, by extension, responds to the evidence users needs, and the context shapes what becomes of the evidence, and they also drive the project. The second advantage is that the co-production also allows to fill ad hoc decision-making needs and be able to rapidly respond to questions that might arise using that co-production approach, and more importantly, as a knowledge management exercise as well. Now let's talk about the lessons that we're learning. The first one, which is mainly focused on the researchers. Sometimes, or most times, researchers come with distance, assumption, and on the high horses, and make some of these assumptions that we, represent the people. We know better than these civil servants, and in fact, it actually makes the co-production difficult, right? So that's one key element to recognize here. And then on the second point, another important element is who then becomes the custodian of rigor in the co-production exercise, right? Because we produce these reports, provide evidence. Some of these reports may be submitted to, say, cabinet and may eventually become national policy. But who becomes the custodian of that rigor? Because there is rigor in those reports that go to cabinet, as an instance, right? In the same way, where you want to submit a paper for peer review, there's a rigor that is needed there. And also, we also need to consider, right? We'll get out of our high horses and recognize that policymakers are equally or more like us, or like researchers, to have activist background, to understand better the political and economic realities as well, and to work under pressure. They also work under pressure to deliver high quality work, right? In short time frames and non-flexible deadlines. Maybe a minister could request a report, or whatever, a director could request a report within government that is needed by tomorrow. Maybe there's a big meeting happening. And they also have a public mandate to implement these policies and programs, because they've been voted into power by the people, actually. Now, lesson 2, how is co-production managed, right? It only makes sense that if you have shared values, shared visions, it makes it easier, right? But in some cases, most cases, it's easier said than done, right? So co-production actually needs to be managed, and in fact, it can also be managed into existence. It's not really a romantic ideal, but it's a means to an end. Manage these interactions and manage carefully externalities and skill sets. Third lesson really speaks to, it's more really kind of like context specific, because the reality is, in our context, the public procurement system is set up for a consultancy culture. Essentially, it's set up in this way. Tender process, right? You submit a tender to do a particular research, that's fine. You get awarded the tender to do the research, you go away 2 months, 3 months, a year, 2 years, you do your own research, and then come back, produce a report. Maybe there's a bit of deliberations to quality assure the product that you have provided. But it's not really ideal for the co-production, because the question becomes, in that period when you have gone away, we are missing an opportunity for deliberations that could exist, so that the evidence users also understand the process and understand the evidence that is going into whatever product that you are going to bring to them. And it's also not ideal for co-production, especially for long-term relationships, because the process is actually prone to corruption, right? It's something that we need to think about, because once you develop that relation, maybe in that co-production exercise, the risk is you then start getting more and more tenders. It goes to one entity. So it's something that we need to consider as well, and that's lesson number 3. Then lesson number 4, it's around reframing incentives in the academia. The incentive structure in academia is centered around publication, and all of that. And it's really not well aligned for policy engagement and policy influence, right? So long as you publish. But the key question becomes, are we aiming to attract the brightest individuals or those that are most politically sensitive or politically dedicated? So in the long term, it's important that we consider the role of academia and society. As we move forward, right, I promise this is my last slide. It's important to recognize the difference between researcher-driven co-production and decision-maker-driven co-production, right? And decision-maker-driven co-production is really more focused on state capacity. It's more demand-led, right? And that's what becomes important, because the idea we want to see evidence being used in decision making. And also this idea around secondments, right? Planting more researchers into the policy making organization, not necessarily to do research, but understand the policy making space itself. And just to preempt some of the elements that we'll talk about tomorrow in the session about interventions to drive evidence use, one of the barriers that we actually find is the issue of researchers not understanding the policy-making environment. And what that means is they're not really able to engage in the most appropriate way with policymakers to drive evidence use. For instance, like in policy dialogues, you need that experience as a researcher to be able to conduct policy dialogues. And then the last 2 points, it's really about professional norms and practices, that cross-learning. Policymakers embracing rapid learning culture, researchers making full policy engagement a non-negotiable. And thank you, colleagues. This brings me to the end of my presentation, but as we're speaking about synergies, I'm compelled to thank individuals, organizations that have shaped our work, that have shaped my work as an individual as well, just to say, put out the names of people that I know that at this conference, and apologies if I miss your name, individuals like John Levis, Carla, Vivian, Ruth Stewart, Esha, thank you so much for the wonderful collaboration. Our director, Lawrence Langer, many individuals from 3IE, Betty, we've had wonderful collaborations. Tanya, wonderful collaborations as well. Let me stop there, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Promise, for this insightful, interesting talk about the inspiring work that PACE is doing, with a focus on 2 particular issues. On the one hand, the embedded co-production process, and also the responsive evidence mapping to really tailor the knowledge production to the needs of the users, and then the lessons learned also that you shared, among others, that the process has to be managed.